So by the time I post the first video in the series, this is about as far as I am. I would say this is roughly about 60 to 70% carved with chainsaws, and then after that I'm going to do the detail carving. So hopefully by the time I post the first couple installments, this will be done. This isn't going to be a video series showing you or teaching you how to carve with chainsaws. I do not consider myself a professional chainsaw carver, professional chainsaw artist. This is more so going to be a series of the process of which I took to get to this point, why I did it, and how I kind of troubleshooted some of the problems that popped up. If you have a little know-how and you're good with chainsaws, I think you can make something like this by watching this video, but I just kind of want to get it out there right from the beginning. This is not going to be a how-to guide of how to carve a bear with old scrap wood, which is what this is. Also, with that being said, the videos are going to have a lot more talking than carving, and that's just because I'm going to be working through the process as I go, because I've never done anything like this before. So if you're not a fan of videos with a lot of descriptions of how people do things, this is probably not going to be the series for you either. So on the other side of this kind of wall I built is a bay that's the exact same size as this one. Been kind of taking it over slowly over the years, and it's full of storage right now. And it's just been getting, the busier I get in here, the unsafer it gets. I spend most of my time moving stuff around from my work surfaces to other work surfaces, because I don't really have a fully functioning table, and that's usually full of projects anyway. So I think I'm going to bite the bullet and expand to the other side, but that means I have to get rid of a lot of stuff. And most of that stuff is scraps of wood. Like, for instance, I have a ton of pieces of ply that are around this size. My wood rack's full of scrap. That's most of it's worthless. I have scrap there. Piles of junk here. That plywood I'm turning into something, but behind that's all scrap, and then there's scrap down here, and I just pretty much chuck it in here. I have an entire rack of molding up there. Underneath my outfeed table has turned into a collection of garbage. And I'm not really one for throwing stuff away, so I've been trying to think of something to do with all of these scraps that you're just not going to be able to make a piece of furniture out of this. You could probably make some shelves and stuff, but I don't really have a market for smaller shelving units. With all this scrap, I kind of came up with this idea of making a tall sculpture. And I originally was thinking, obviously, of making it as a HoneyBadger, because that is the name of my business, but the space I have to work with is going to be on the outside corner of that other door. I have a lot more space vertically than I do horizontally. There's not a ton of great photos of HoneyBadgers standing on their hind legs, because I just really don't think they use their hind legs that much. So I kind of decided to go with a bear, which I feel like is almost a rite of passage for woodworkers, especially ones that carve. So I'm going to be making a rather tall bear, or attempting to, in the corner out here. The other reason I chose a bear is because I felt like if I made a standing HoneyBadger, it would just look like a poorly rendered bear, and there would just be a lot of confusion. Some pressure treated lumber. There's a 4x4 underneath, and then I think that's a 2x8. I just cut up to make this kind of rudimentary base for it. Obviously a foot's going to go on either side, and that's just so that water can drain and it doesn't rot from the bottom up. I didn't put a ton of hardware in it just because there's going to be so much weight on top of it. I shouldn't have to worry too much about the wood warping. Basically, my plan is to kind of maybe piecing this out in slices, just kind of cutting that lumber into rough shapes, not really circular or even the shapes of the finished project. It's going to start off fairly abstract, just rough shapes, and kind of just stacking them once I get to the belly, forming them into one sheet and kind of just working that way, almost like an additive process from the base up to get the rough figure. Kind of the one photo I printed out that I'm going to be working on. It's just going to be like as if this was sliced all the way up. I kind of like the fact that it looks like the bear is waving. I'm probably going to keep that in there. and I'm going to try and film as much of this as possible. This is going to be one of those processes that's probably going to take a while. I'm going to work on it in between other projects. I've got a ton of stuff going on in the next couple weeks between planning on opening this space, getting rid of a ton of this garbage in here, as well as still doing customer projects. So I'm going to try and film as much of it as possible. So I think the easiest way to go about starting this is breaking this up into smaller sections, picking rough dimensions, and then cutting all those pieces out. So the footprint, the two sides of that base, the footprint is 18 inches by 9. So that's what I'm going to make these 2 feet. And then I'm going to go up as high as visually looks good, which I'm assuming is going to be about 3 or 4 inches. So I'm going to cut a bunch of 18 by 9 inch pieces and then stack them until I get that height, and then just gradually make those pieces wider. So that's simply going to be a process of ripping down some of that scrap into 9-inch pieces, and then I'll trim it to 18 on the radial arm saw and then just start attaching stuff. So I'm using up most of my plywood on the base because I want this to have a pretty solid foundation. In fact, for most of the legs, I'm going to try and stick with single sheeted goods, and then when I get towards the belly, I will feel more comfortable about using multiple pieces to make up a surface. So right now I have 5 sheets, and what I'm going to do is take 2 off and put some 2.5-inch screws through all of this into the base. That's all I'm going to be doing to attach all this stuff. I'm going to be using screws. Glue's great, but I think in general it's going to be a little waste of time. They sell waterproof glue, but you're not going to convince me that any cheap glue is going to be waterproof. And I'm going to stick to putting the screws kind of towards the inside of this, because if I do decide to go back in and carve this once it's built, I don't want to have to worry about hitting any sort of hardware. But now that I have the feet, as I start getting higher up on that frame, I'm just going to be adjusting my fence by about 1/2 inch. So the feet were 9 inches wide. So now I'm going to start making the legs 9.5, putting probably 3 or 4 stacks, and then just increasing it. And then you'll gradually get a natural taper that will look like a leg. So I'm going to do the exact same thing with my radial arm saw. I have a fence set up, and I'm going to be changing the width of, I'm going to be changing that fence by 1/2 inch every time I change the table saw by 1/2 inch. So I'm going from 9 inches by 16 inches to 9.5 by 16.5. So I've been working on that bear, and I've kind of changed up the way I'm going to execute this project a little bit. And that's just because whenever I'm carving something, as dumb as it may sound, I'm always kind of surprised by how I thought something looks, but it really doesn't. You kind of pick up on these subtleties of form while you're carving something and staring at photos that you don't really notice before. So as I was working, I was looking at this photo, and I kind of noticed that these legs, even though they're 2 singular legs, I ended up printing out a couple photos. You could see, especially from the back side, it's a singular leg. There's a lot of fur much further down on the body than I originally thought. These legs don't stay separate all the way up to the stomach, similar to our legs, because of all that fur and loose skin. So you could see there's really only a very small portion where seemingly the body is not connected on the bottom. So when I kind of noticed that on that photo is when I decided to print out 3 other perspectives, one more from the front facing head on, one from the side, and then this great photo from the back. The back isn't going to get a ton of work from me just because you won't see it from where I have it. Then I went through and I split each of these photos in half and then into 2 quadrants besides the half. So now I have 4 quadrants. I decided to make this bear 8 feet tall, so each quadrant will correspond to 2-foot increments. You could see from kind of glancing at the photos that the lines, even though the bear is different size in each photo, the lines intersect the body at just about the same spots. This top one is right by the collar of the neck on each bear, as well as the bottom one is right through the middle of the thigh on each bear. So that's actually a really good sign for using these quadrants to build. And same thing with the middle through the stomach. So I moved this out of the rain last night because I don't want it to get super wet before I put some sort of sealer on it, or at least get more of it built. So once I had those bears, I then broke up my wall, since it's going to be in a corner, into those 3 quadrants. The 8th quadrant I didn't do because it's going to be above the roof line and I couldn't mark where it is just yet. So to mark these quadrants, I did them in 2-foot sections all the way up, but I also accounted for the fact that my base is 5 inches thick. So even since this is my 2-foot quadrant, it's really at 27 inches. So now, at least proportional wise, it'll be much easier to make this bear with the plywood, because I could tell based on where I am in those quadrants the thickness I should have. And personally, for me, I find proportions, because I'm not a great drawer, to be the hardest part of any sort of carving. Those proportions are off even slightly, your eye picks up on it so quickly and it just looks terrible. So now that I have these, I'm probably going to move this back. I might dig out some of this grass and then continue working on this. So I have this set up in the place that it's pretty much going to stay. I'm a little nervous about how far the roof sticks out and potentially the butt against the fence, but I'm just going to have to play with that. I don't want that to come into the walkway or too far into my workspace, so we're going to see how this works. I leveled this on both planes, and then where this hit the grass, I dug out a little bit, added some aggregate for drainage, and then propped it up on a cinder block. So now I continue stacking this lumber. I thought I might have to revisit these 2 stacks, but after looking at the photo, the legs pretty much stay separate, and then all of a sudden they kind of form together. So I'm going to keep doing this and then start combining them. This is where I'm at with those 2 legs, and they pretty much just look like upside down pyramids. I kind of gradually tapered them on all sides to get that shape, and now I'm about ready to join the 2 pieces together. And what I did for that was, if you look at these photos, you have that split in the legs about 2/3 of the way up of that first quadrant, and then 1 more third it's joined. So since this is 24 inches, I went to about 16 inches, which is 2/3, and now it can be joined to become one piece. So from here on out, it should go, this is going pretty fast, but it should go a little faster, because I have, mostly what I have in my shop are these long skinny pieces. So I could just lay long skinny pieces along there, take my attach them with screws, and then take my circular saw and then just trim all the sides, now that I don't have to worry about making 2 stacks. And I didn't have a ton of fat pieces. You could see towards the end I had to start piecing multiple pieces together. The last thing I really have to figure out, because the final pose is going to be similar to this one, because I like how it looks like the bear is waving. So I'm going to have to figure out what I'm doing with these arms. I think what I'm going to do is, about here, I'll just make the body fatter, and then from about where an elbow on the bear would be to the hands will be separate pieces that I attach to the sculpture, instead of making it this wide all the way up. So I'm just below the 2-foot mark, and I'm kind of using this technique of using smaller scraps in between, almost sandwiching them in between bigger pieces, and that's because I just completely underestimated the amount of wood something like this was going to take. And as much scrap as I have, I think what I have in my shop now might get me to the 4-foot mark if I'm lucky. So this might turn into a much longer term project than I was originally intending it to be. I do have some lumber in storage I could pull out and use, but stacking it like this is just using up a ton of stuff. Once I get to past the shoulders, the head will not use nearly as much lumber, and that's almost an entire quadrant in and of itself, is just the head, so maybe it will go better. But I think for now I'm going to be using even smaller scrap than I thought I would, and like I said, sandwiching it in between these other pieces. For the main part, like you can see in the photos, there's not a ton of protrusion coming from this bear, even front to back. Obviously the butt sticks out a little bit and the belly sticks out a little bit, but it's not much past the original plane of the legs. So you can kind of see that I'm tapering this out a little towards the back and the front, but not intensely, because you can see they don't stick out nearly as much as one would think as well. And look at the one that I'm kind of copying for the pose, is the same thing. It's mostly very flat. There's not a lot of protrusion except for the arms. Even the kind of bulbous bear here, same thing, except for the back side and the front side stick out a little bit. So I finished pulling material out of the other side of my shop, and that's pretty much the pile I have left. There's going to be some material on this side of the shop, but most of it, as you could see from the rack, is going to be smaller pieces. And I'll probably end up using a lot of that for the head, because for the head it's so much smaller. I could laminate pieces of it in my shop and then attach it after the fact. And even for the arms, these longer pieces would work well. I have some large garage door panels in storage. These are pieces of those panels on top. So I think with this stuff, I should definitely be getting past, and the panels in my storage, I should definitely be getting past 4 feet. I'm kind of hoping of getting as close to 6 feet as possible, because like I said, after that, I think some of that smaller stock will work. If worse comes to worse, I'd buy enough material and use enough material that I could add to it. It could kind of be an ongoing project. This is where I'm at after yesterday. That pile of wood, I pretty much used most of it up. There's mostly just scrap left. And when I started, after cleaning out the one side of the garage, there's that panel door right there. That got me about 10 inches. So I went through the shop. You could see my barren lumber rack over there, and all of that lumber is this pile right here, and that should take me pretty high, because mostly what I've been using up until now is 3/4 inch ply, and most of this stuff is going to be at least 1.5 inches, so it should go twice as fast. Went to my storage unit and got these 2 old garage panels that one of my neighbors was throwing out years and years and years ago. I used to use them to make wine racks, but I don't really sell those anymore, so I'm just going to cut these up. And I measured these should buy me at least 7 more inches, just these 2 panels. I have a couple other scraps that I got out of my storage unit. I haven't really worked on it in about 2 weeks, and there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, the whole point of me making this bear was to get rid of all of my scrap, and that is because, and I can't remember if I mentioned this in the original video, this used to be all storage. And what I did was I insulated and paneled all my walls and opened up this space. There's still some work to do. This will come down as well. So now I'm going to utilize both bays of this garage for my shop. The other reason I stopped working on this is because I've been out here doing this for probably about 5 years, and this was the first time someone complained about me. I don't think it's one of my vicinity neighbors, because they're pretty chill, super friendly, love the stuff I do. I think it might actually be someone new to town. But anyway, you could see I kind of carved off that corner, and basically they told me I had to take this down, but I showed them that it's actually tethered to the fence. The fence is actually cemented into the ground. It's tethered there as well as tethered there, so it's kind of impossible for this to fall over. And I also told him it's not just a stack of wood, it's all screwed together. And the guy that came through to talk to me was really nice, and he went and back and talked to a supervisor, and they're letting me keep it. So that is awesome. However, I think now that I'm on the radar, I wasn't in love with this base, and it does rock a little bit. So I think what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take off this top layer by unscrewing everything and stacking it nicely next to it, and making a new base for these feet and moving it a little bit away from the garage. And I also bought these spikes to kind of sink into the ground through the feet, just so that if something pops up again, I think the only thing that saved this from being made to get rid of is the fact that I had tethered it to the fence. So I just kind of want to triple up my security on this.